But I do want to just mention to you that I do lots of things internationally, and I get to go to speak at places, and I'm often sent to go and be the independent assessor of human rights programs in other countries. And what's so interesting to me is that women everywhere will say to you, I didn't think that there would be domestic violence in Britain. I thought it only happened here. And you'd be amazed at the extent of it. I was only in Spain recently, and I was describing how that 2 women a week in Britain die at the hands of a partner with a background of violence, that the police receive 1 call per minute about domestic violence, and they couldn't believe it because they thought it was only Spanish men, machismo Spanish men who did this kind of thing. It was Latin men that did this. They didn't think it happened with cool English men, and so it was very interesting to hear, and that happens everywhere. People are always, and as soon as you open this thing, it's almost like a floodgate of women describing the ways in which women experience this stuff domestically. So all I would say is having women in there absolutely changes it. It changes the discourse. The more you have women in the courts and in the senior courts, the Canadian judges will tell you that it changed in Canada by having more women and having a much more balanced sort of, Supreme Court. There was a stage where they had, I think, out of the 9, 4 of the judges were women. And they just said that we got a different kind of way of having a discussion about some of these issues. And so I would say that it's really important that we bring women through in the law, and we have to celebrate women coming through. And then you get many different kinds of women who will take up different kinds of cases, but it really does change the nature of things.
Thank you very much, Helena. Our second speaker is Diane Perrins, who is the Professor of Economic Geography and Gender Studies at the LSE. She directed the Gender Institute between 2004 and 2008, and is currently co-directing the LSE Commission on Gender Inequality and Power. Diane.
Yes, I'm just going to change the order of my talk because it makes sense to begin by talking a little bit about the LSE Commission because it follows on so well from Helena's, just lost my mouse. Oh, there it is. Maybe I shouldn't. Oh yes, that's what I just want to go down. Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, I just want to change 3 slides around. Put them at the beginning because let me put it here and then go to there. Yes. Go back. I just want to go back a little bit. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Oh, how does it come bigger then? Oh, that's all right. Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. Given that. Following that wonderful talk, which of course is incredibly difficult and much more than meat and potatoes, I would say. But anyway, I am going to talk about 2 things. Firstly, I'm going to talk about 2 studies, basically. One that the Women's Budget Group did for the ITUC, which was about investment in social care that Diane referred to earlier. But I was also asked to say a word or 2 about the LSE Commission on Gender Inequality and Power that I was involved in with a range of colleagues, and it follows on very nicely because what we did or tried to do in our study was to look at gender inequality across 4 areas, across the economy, law, politics, and then media and culture. So your own project here is a little wider in terms of your stretch of the humanities, but we did include the media, which I think made a very important difference to thinking about the ways in which the different forms of inequality intersect. So we can talk about intersectionality between individuals and identities, but it's also important to think about how gender inequalities in the labour market and in income distribution sort of privilege the already advantaged women and curtail opportunities for women elsewhere in politics and in the law, which then are all reinforced by adverse media representations. And some of the kind of stories that Helena alluded to are present in all these 4 spheres of activity, in the economy, in politics, in law, and in the media. And one of the other recurring themes in this report was austerity. And while I agree with Helena's optimistic kind of interpretation that some progress is made, I am slightly worried about the present context and the context of precarity associated with the austerity programmes that we have at the moment. I mean, on my way to the meeting this morning here, you know, I passed a food bank, and food banks are something that I grew up with, similar time to Helena, as a child of a widowed parent, you know, living on social benefits and what have you. We were quite well off, and I got a grant to go to university. You know, I was paid to go, sort of £360, but that covered you for a year. So, you know, very, very different from the situation my children faced. Although, you know, given my privileged sort of time in which I was born, then they are in a privileged position now compared to other young people without coming from someone who, through the state, became part of the middle class. So the ways in which so the impact of austerity, I think, is something we have to watch out for, and the ways in which work and so on has become much more precarious. And also how there is this backlash in politics. You know, one of the things that we were very much struck by was, particularly when we wrote the update of the commission, was the ways in which, you know, this now the situation. We wrote the update, you know, a few weeks after you know, a well-qualified woman in the United States was rejected in favour of Donald Trump, shortly after the Brexit vote and the new Conservative government. And it's really, you know, there is a profound challenge about how this egalitarian agenda has been rejected by those who in principle might benefit from it, without wishing to sound patronising. So what we, again, thinking about how the different forms of intersectionality, the different sort of aspects of life intersect, we found that the media representations normalised austerity. David Cameron's remark about how we've maxed out our credit card was incredibly powerful in terms of somehow or other blaming the debt on ordinary people instead of blaming the banks, who were of course responsible in the first instance. And so the media has contributed to the disguise of the uneven impact, and then the law's ability to redress urgent issues such as gender-based violence and access to justice, in terms of being able to enforce labour rights, and in terms of giving people access to legal support and so on, have all kind of contributed to the kinds of issues that Diane Ellison was talking about earlier, about the impact of austerity on those least responsible and those least able to counter these forms. And so, yes, so the different forms of inequality intersect. Now that the report goes into some detail in all these different sectors of activity, you know, the cuts in services, for example, impacting very much on violence and the closure of centres, and even though some more money was put before it, it was just a very, very, very low compared to that had been taken away. So we make a whole series, you know, you have to read the reports, but coming out of them, because I really wanted to talk about the other project, you know, we make a whole series of recommendations, including socially fair, gender-sensitive macroeconomic policies. I mean, I start with the economy, I guess, because that's my background. Very much gender auditing. We're very much in favour of mandatory quotas. And it's interesting that the World Development Report 2012 on gender and development, which has been criticised quite widely, does nevertheless recommend mandatory quotas. So you've got an official sort of supra-international institution recommending something, and on efficiency grounds, which is quite interesting. I would argue on equity grounds, but I'll take efficiency if it's likely to press the case. Simply as a quick fix, it's not a total solution. It won't give rise, it won't change the processes leading to the inequality. It will have to be constantly monitored and reinforced, but it does change the setting, which in answer to the question that was raised, Helena indicated, you know, the ways in which changing presence doesn't guarantee progressive outcomes, but it makes them potentially more likely. So we're very much in favour of those. We also, I've got them written down here. We also advocate creating a national care service on a model similar to the National Health Service, and I'll explain why later. want transparency in all kinds of criteria of merit, so to get over the merit notion as being something which is not sort of disaggregated into something which one can tangibly assess. And then other measures relating to the media, some sort of monitoring observatory to sort of check for all the ways in which gender is represented in appalling ways. And then training on gender auditing, and again alluding to something that Diane Olsen said earlier, very much challenge men's over-representation and the structures leading to unequal outcomes. One interesting example, and I know there's a session on politics and quotas later, but the Irish have a maximum. They have a maximum of 70% of any one gender in positions of power in the first election, hoping to move down to 60%. So it's actually thinking about questions of over-representation rather than always thinking of under-representation, because in the corporations and so on, there's a lot of attention paid to things like the gender pay gap, partly because of a McKinsey report which has found that if you had gender equality, something like trillions would be added to GDP. So corporations are interested, but they tend to focus on supply-side measures, so mentoring women to overcome their inadequacies, rather than looking at the processes that lead to those qualities not being recognised. That is these are part of the recommendations of this commission that we held. It's a sort of meta-analysis of existing research in the field. Okay, so that's that study, and I thought it followed on, so I thought I would begin there. But then to end on